you very much, councillors. We're now up to item 12 on the agenda, and that is the City Rail link and the approval that we need to give along with the Crown for a contract variation. Once again, we've workshopped this quite thoroughly. It is a big decision that we're making today because the new contracts that are being entered into C5 and 7 are worth about $700 million. So I've got four officers that are available to outline the process today. Ed Siddle, Alistair Cameron, Barry Potter and Fleur Aldridge. So I've got Barry at the table. I'm not sure whether that indicates that he's leading on it. It does. I'll invite him to speak to the paper.
Kia ora, Your Worship. David.
Oh.
Kia ora.
Oh, sorry. David, are you trying to take a call?
No, yes, I am. I want to notify my departure now, and because of the two items that are complete. Thank you all for including the board as part of the governing body. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Ka kite. Kia
ora.
Right, we come back to Barry Potter.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mayor Goff, and thank you, councillors. Look, a very brief 2-minute introduction. As the Mayor mentioned, this is approval being sought for CRLL to award 2 significant packages of work to Link Alliance. The intention to do this was flagged by CRLL back in June last year when the stations and tunnel contracts were awarded to Link Alliance. You'll recall that those contracts are referred to as C3 or Contract 3. So 2 packages of work that we are looking at here. C5 or Contract 5 is the connection to the Western Line at Mount Eden, and C7 is the station rails and signals and controls and communications and all that work. So 2 substantial packages of work. The reason why approval is sought, the 2 reasons again. The first is that these transactions under the Companies Act are greater than 50% of CRLL's assets, and CRLL's assets are currently assessed at about $1.3 billion. These transactions are over $700 million combined, and therefore require shareholder approval. That's Crown and Council. That's the first reason. Second reason is that they are identified in the Project Delivery Agreement, which is the agreement between Crown, Council and CRLL about how the project will be delivered. They're identified in there as material contracts requiring sponsor approval. So there's 2 reasons they're coming here. CRLL have provided considerable assurance, and quite a bit of work and scrutiny has been given to this, that this allows them to complete the works still in their budget of $4.419 billion, and they have committed and have a level of confidence that they can still deliver by December 2024. So online, as Mayor Phil mentioned, we've got legal support and governance support, so we have people here who can answer questions as well as me, and we'll take that as a paper being read and answer any questions that people may have, the councillors may have.
Thank you very much for that, Barry. As I said, we had the outline of what is involved in this process, and I think we're all very pleased that the project is broadly on time and within budget, and given the sums of money involved in this and past experience with other projects, that's great. I think everybody was pretty clear too on the fact that actually bringing C5 and 7 into the tunnels and stations might have been as a result of necessity, but it has some real advantages in terms of an integrated approach. So I've just checking to see whether we have any questions, Sandra. No questions. Do we have anybody that wishes to comment on it? Okay, must be as I said. Everybody appreciated the briefing that we got and understands the issues and understands the rationale for doing this. In which case, I shall put the. I've got to have a mover and a seconder. I'll move it. Councillor Simpson has asked if she might second that.
Your Worship.
Yep, she's agreed to that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Are there any dissenting voices? If so, if not, I should say, I declare that passed unanimously. And Barry, you can head home again now. It's on account of how he's dressed. He's looking very casual, as he's entitled to be during level 3. Right, we come now to the Ports of Auckland Statement of Corporate Intent. And you will see from the screen that there is some changes in the recommendations, and Pipacoom has asked for these changes. I've looked at them and talked to officers about them. I don't see any problem with that. In fact, I think it would be helpful if we had a written response on the automation project, the effect of COVID-19 on the business and health and safety, given some of the recent events and the resulting court cases and quite hefty fines that the organisation has attracted. So to introduce this paper, I'll just double check.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just clarify that those additions were proposed by myself and councillors Casey, Henderson, Bartley and Collins.
Thank you.
So it's a collaborative
effort, and I think all three of those areas are areas that we would benefit from a clear response in advance of the September meeting. And just to remind members that we will be resuming our meetings with the board and chief executive of the Ports of Auckland. I think that's an important part of strengthening our relationship and exercising oversight. So at this stage, I'll ask Sarah Holdham and Alistair Cameron to introduce the item. Perhaps just to get it on the table, I can move it. Is there somebody that would like to second the motion?
I will then. No one else was?
Okay, and who is... That's Desley?
Sorry, Desley.
Thank you. Right, Sarah, are you leading off on the item?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, good afternoon, councillors. The purpose of the report is to provide shareholder feedback on Ports of Auckland's Statement of Corporate Intent. In terms of what that document is required to cover, it's similar to a CCO's Statement of Intent, although it does, the Ports does operate under a different statutory framework and piece of legislation. So you'll note from the report that the Statement of Corporate Intent isn't that different from last year. That's not to say that there isn't a lot going on, which the councillor's amendment to the recommendations has highlighted. So that there are a number of other issues that you would be interested in, including the automation project, health and safety, and responding to COVID. And we were intending that the upcoming workshop with the Ports Board and Executive in mid-September, which was actually rescheduled from March because it was due to take place as the first lockdown started. We were intending that that workshop would be an opportunity to get more information and an understanding of what the Port is doing on those. So the amendments are asking the Port to, as the Mayor said, to provide a written response before the workshop to ensure that that is a more fruitful discussion. And there are also some relatively minor comments on the Statement of Corporate Intent elsewhere through the paper. And just the other, I think the last thing to note is that one of those comments relates to the Port has told us that it plans to refresh its company vision and strategy next year. So one of those comments is to say to the Port that we would like, as the council, to have an opportunity to ensure that its vision aligned with the council's objectives for the company and for the future of the Port. So I'll take the rest of the report as read, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Right, thank you very much, Sarah. So I'll open it up for questions. Are there any councillors with questions? If you can indicate to Sandra or verbally to me. If not, Councillor Darby, a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sarah. And just a question, probably also to Councillor Coombe. Councillor Coombe, would you be willing, and other members of course, be willing to put under that B somewhere a request for an outline of the port's roadmap to emission reductions. I think that is an important one. Would there be a willingness of the mover and seconder? Well, it's actually yourself, Mayor, and Councillor Simpson. So at that, I don't think it's a written one, or it could be written or verbal, but I would like to see the roadmap to the emission reductions, which is referred to.
I'm relaxed about that. Desley, are you happy to accept that? We have got some reference in the statement of corporate intent to the emissions reduction. I'll just double check. First of all, Desley, are you happy, Councillor Simpson, to incorporate that as a request for written response?
Well, hold on. I think we've already asked for that. These are things that we've never asked before. That emissions one has already been asked via another medium, hasn't it?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, under A, we have approved the emissions target, but that's slightly different from the pathway that Councillor Darby is asking about. Maybe if I just ask Sarah, if you've got any comment on that?
Yeah, so it is slightly different, I think. So the comment that I've proposed is relating to the emissions target. So ports have actually included a year-to-year target of reducing its emissions, and that applies for the length of the statement of corporate intent, which is 3 years. Councillor Darby raises a good point that, I guess it would be good to understand how that change over 3 years is going to lead to the ports achieving its eventual emissions goal of being emissions free by 2040, I think it is. So, I think it's, I'm sure the port would be happy to brief on that, whether by writing or at the meeting. We just need to manage to make sure that we are not kind of using too much of that, putting too many items onto that meeting agenda. But I think that would be fine to add that.
Okay, I'm just suggesting some words here, and this is still subject to my seconder's agreement. The port's pathway to reducing emissions. Probably it's just as simple as that, actually. Councillor Simpson, you relaxed about that?
Yeah, so you'd put that in as B4, correct?
B4, yeah.
That's fine, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Simpson, as well. And look, I raise that because in this SOI, there's reference to becoming emissions free by 2040, but we're not quite seeing how to get there. And then, of course, we've got our own target of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030 in half that time. So we just need to reconcile those two. Sarah, going down to 5.2, it's got where practicable, Ports of Auckland will align with the strategic priorities of council, etc. Now, we've just come off considering the CCO review panel work, and they reminded us of giving CCOs, admittedly this is not a CCO, it is a 100% owned entity, of course, they reminded us of giving detailed direction and clear accountability. And I'm just wondering why the words where practicable instead of giving effect to our strategic plans, actually, not our priorities. And then I go on to note that some of the names of the plans are completely out of date. Have you noticed that? Can you give us some feedback on that, please? So that's 5.2 and 5.3.
Yes, sorry, just turning my mic back on. Yes, I had noticed that, and I've actually raised that with them directly because they are. I think I might have mentioned it in the report as well. That some of the terminology is out of date. In terms of giving effect to the council's strategic plans, I guess there are a couple of things I would say. So the port's objective under the Port Companies Act is to operate as a successful business, and that I think sometimes that gets that can be interpreted as essentially it can do kind of whatever it wants as long as that will contribute to its profitability as a company. That's a very colloquial way of me putting it. But I guess the thing is, there are different ways for a company to be successful. So it doesn't. I don't think that it necessarily precludes the council setting strategic objectives about other aspects of the port's performance that the port would then need to be to give effect to. I think that I guess I would also go back and point to the recommendation in the CCO review report about the specificity and the kind of applicability of that policy direction to ports. I mean, there are a number of I guess a number of plans and policies that touch on ports business or touch on the port footprint. But I think that providing that clear, tangible direction to the port would I think assist with actually getting that implemented. So yeah, I mean I hope that answers your question.
Mayor, look, I think yourself and the deputy have been given delegated authority to sign this off. So maybe it's more of a conversation that Sarah can have with you both. There definitely does need to be some changes there in terms of the names of the strategic plans. And I'm probably feeling that we need to move more towards giving effect to rather than, conveniently abiding by plans where they're so-called practicable. I think there's far too much wriggle room there. Just a couple of other key points, Mayor, before I close. And this is something that you're very aware of, Mayor. There doesn't seem to be anything here about collaborating with Auckland Council to accommodate berthage for mega cruise ships east of Queen's Wharf. Is that something that should show up here? And then I'll just go to my other points. The automation has been handled by the amendment from Councillor Coombe and others, and that's good. And then the other target that I thought should be there is a target that demonstrates the move from freight coming to and from the port and shifting it from road to rail. There's some targets around truck turnaround times, but there's no target on moving freight from truck to rail. Has that been considered, Sarah? And the other point that I just made before.
Sorry about that. Sorry, forgot to turn my mic on. I just point you to, in regard to the last question, there is a metric around percentage of land side moves on rail. It's under the improved environment outcome on the statement of intent, which is on page 67 of your agenda. So it has, and that at the moment that's at 20% and is 20% for the next year, but moving up to 25% in the year after.
Yeah.
Okay, I misinterpreted that one. So just going to the question about working with us on relocation or the establishment of berthage for mega cruise.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that, Sarah, that's part of the discussions that I'm having with the ports, and it wouldn't do any harm at all to put this into the statement of corporate intent, because the ports have indicated that they are ready to move in the direction, instead of an extension to Captain Cook's Wharf or the now rejected Dolphin at the end of Queen's Wharf, that we create berthage and a terminal on Bledisloe Wharf itself. So I think if we can come up with a form of words that reflects that and puts and formalises the informal or private rather than informal discussions that I've had with ports, I believe that would be helpful. But do you have any response to that?
Is that a question for me, Mr. Mayor?
Yep, Sarah.
Yes, I was actually just about to say the same thing. I think that would be useful to formalise that direction in the statement of corporate intent. So, and I'm happy to come up with some wording that would reflect if that's an objective of the council.
One small one to conclude, Mayor and Sarah. In the document, the port says that its 30-year master plan aligns with the city centre master plan. That's not correct, and we've had to remind them of that 3 times now. The resolution says that the port master plan is in the general direction of the city centre master plan. There is a big difference. Can we ensure that the resolution is read and interpreted correctly and continues to be interpreted correctly? Because it's not accurate at the moment, Sarah. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and I support that. That has been drawn to the port's attention before, and for whatever reason, they continue to use the same words. And I think the rather than notes that it aligns and considered the plan and let's try and wordsmith it somewhere else. But it's that the plan is in line in the committee, because we're talking about our committee, planning committee, and notes that it is in the general direction of the in the general direction of the council's city centre master plan. I think that's that wording would probably do it. You happy with that, Councillor Darby?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just type something on the sidebar here just to make it clear. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Right, we get on to other questions. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of questions on, I guess, the financial side, and I reserve my right to speak. I've sort of put myself back into the queue. I've seen in this document that there are key performance indicators and targets there, but there's nothing to assess it against because there's no baseline. It's only looking forward. Is it normal for key performance targets to not have a baseline? I'm aware we're in 2020 and COVID has hit, but 2019 might be something to assess it by. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think there are some of the key performance targets that don't have metrics, so they're more about work items rather than actual performance targets that can be measured against. I think that I'm not best qualified to kind of comment on this, but I think that the financial performance, you can display, and in performance reporting, you can display the previous year's result, and we actually do display that, so it provides a way to kind of compare. But I think that it does each year's individual targets for financial revenue and profit and etc. are specific to that year because it depends on what capital projects they might be doing during that year, what kind of how many customers they have and therefore what revenue they're anticipating. But I think that in terms of judging it against the previous year, then in the performance reporting, then that's certainly important.
Yeah, just a supplementary to that, and then one more question on a different aspect of the report. So the supplementary, I'm looking at the table here. It's the first column of targets is 2021. So, I don't want to be a broken record, but a good example here, number of harbour spills caused by POL. We've got 000 all the way through. How many were there in 2019? How many were there in 2020? So how can we assess what a good target is if we've got nothing to measure it against? I don't know. I hope that was a question. Yeah, apologies.
No, that is a question. And
was that a question?
Yeah, it is a good question.
Oh
yeah.
So I was just going to say that we can ask them to include the 2019 or 2020. Well, 2020 at least, I think, the previous year results as a sort of comparison, if because we do actually do that for the other CCOs.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah, thanks. That's great. And just one more question. So I note in the report here it says, I'll just bring up the quote. I think it's on point 3 I'm looking at. Just sorry, rifling through quickly here. Sorry. But basically, we've gone from an 80% after-tax dividend expected to a 60%. Yes, 0.3. Plans to return the dividend 60% after-tax profits, attributing to the economic conditions, which we totally understand, and the high level of capital investment required. Now, just a question on that. Why are we expressing it in percentage terms? Because it's very difficult for us to figure out as governors whether it's 80% or 60% what that actually means. So is there a dollar value financial projection on this?
From what I understand, it is more typical to report that in terms of, report the after-tax profit in terms of a percentage, the dividend as a percentage of the after-tax profit. And I think that I actually think somebody with some financial background would be better placed, but I do understand that there are always estimates or projections, and I think that all of the different factors that go into affecting what the profit is going to be. I think it can be difficult to kind of estimate what the profit would be in the future, especially 3 years out, if there is taking into account all the factors that affect the profit. So yeah, I don't know if Alistair has anything he wants to say on that.
Yeah, through the chair, just echoing what Sarah said, it's typical for a company such as ports and airports does the same, as to express the dividend payable as a percentage of profit, and the reduction from 80% to 60% seems reasonable given the circumstances, both COVID and the capital program that the ports is undertaking at this time. It's just inherently difficult to predict revenues as an exact target, which is why companies tend to do it as a percentage. And that dividend policy and as a percentage has sort of been in place since ACIL days.
Okay, thank you. And reserve my right to speak. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Yeah, look, it is, as far as I understand, the normal practice to express it as a dividend, as a percentage, because they don't know what their profit is going to be, and therefore they don't know whether they're promising, 80%, 90%, 30%, or whatever. But just to reinforce Councillor Henderson's first point, it is common when you're looking at key performance measures to have a baseline which says actual 2020. Maybe even going back 2 years, so you can just see where they've come from, and you have something to judge the target against. So if you are able to get that changed, Sarah, I think that would be a very positive step. Last question I have at the moment is from Pipacoon. Councillor?
Oh, you missed Kathy there.
I'm sorry, I don't have Kathy on my list, but if Kathy is on the sidebar...
Mine isn't a comment.
It's a comment.
Oh, sorry, I thought Kathy was going to jump it. Okay, well, I do have quite a few questions, if that's okay. And thank you, Sarah, for the report. Just in terms of some of the big issues that are going on at the ports, I think what's happening with the automation project, we've had very little kind of view of. And also what's happening with health and safety. And so it has been very recently reported that the ports have been, let me get the wording right in terms of the headline. So the port admitted a health and safety charge over a fatal crane accident that happened in 2018, and it was a very serious incident. And I think it was 5 years before that there was another fatality. So there are some really big issues happening at the port, and I guess my question goes to that this report, you're asking us to, we're making comments on the statement of corporate intent, which is our mechanism to hold the port accountable to council, But if we're just asking these questions in the September meeting, does that mean it's all going to be too late if there's something that comes? So say, for example, at the September meeting, if we're digging into more of the detail of the straddle automation project and health and safety, that we don't get a chance to then influence the statement of corporate intent? So that's my first question. I do have a couple more.
Sure. Shall I answer that now, or would?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. So no, that isn't. This isn't the only opportunity you have to influence the statement of corporate intent. So as with other CCOs and as I've described in the report, you can change the statement of corporate intent or direct the port company to change a statement of corporate intent at any time. So if you did, for example, if there was a particular target or a program of work that you wanted to include reference to with regard to health and safety, then that would be something that could be done at that time.
Okay, so it's good to know. So when it comes to the September, the meeting's actually a workshop, is that right? So it's going to be a time to really do a deeper dive into some of these issues?
Yeah, that's right. It's a workshop and it will be at the port premises.
Okay, so I mean, I do, that gives me some reassurance in terms of, I guess the concern I've got is that just like the CCO review highlighted, we're really not equipped as governors to know the questions we've got to ask and how we actually, I know the ports isn't a CCO, but how we actually use the accountability mechanisms that we've got. And I think there's quite a lot going on at ports that we really, just aren't even brought to our attention. And that includes just all the delays to the automation project and not just the delays, but the cost escalation. I'm sorry, so I just had another question in terms of the health and safety part. So in the KPIs that are on page 67 of the agenda, page 7 of the statement of corporate intent, it's got the key performance measure, number of lost time injuries, and it's got 000. But there's no measure there in terms of fatalities. So there's nothing that would be picked up that means the port will have to report on the fact that, I mean, all the 2 fatalities that have happened in the last 5 years mean they wouldn't be included in the measure. So that is a question around, it seems to be a missing measure. That it should actually say the number of lost time fatalities should also be 0.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one underneath it also comes into play here, achieve the target of becoming a zero harm workplace. I mean, obviously a fatality is a very significant event and not something, we obviously want to happen. I would just note that, so the port has agreed to provide quarterly reports as of the first quarter of this current financial year. So I have been working with them for a while to try and get that in place, and they have now agreed to doing that. So that is something where they will report against all these performance targets, as well as the kind of topical information about the progress of the automation project and essentially all of the key priorities for us as a shareholder in that reporting. And they've actually agreed to use the same template as the CCOs do. So I agree, it hasn't been sufficient up to date, the kind of information flow. But we have kind of got them to agree to quarterly reporting.
Okay, that's good. And that's where I think that was a comment by Councillor Darby in terms of knowing what the measures were in previous years, so we can actually keep track in terms of did they meet the targets. So it'd be good to go back a few years when we actually see that when it comes to us and their reporting.
Yes, it will definitely compare against previous years.
Yeah. And then I just have, sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I just could have one last question.
Sure, no problem.
So I'm also just come at this as the co-chair of the Hauraki Golf Forum. Te kapa moana nui a toi. And one of our objectives is to stop marine dumping in the marine park or near the marine park. And of course, ports have got a consent to dump just outside of the marine park. But they can do offload that the marine dumping can actually happen in the park if the weather turns bad. But I'm just wondering, a question I have for ports, and I'm wondering how this can be picked up, is that the ports have indicated, and we're pleased about this, that they are looking at alternative options for the marine dumping, for the dredging material. And so at the moment they do use it for mudcrete, but they're going to run out of that need very soon. And so the ports have basically said, we're open to alternative uses of the marine dredge material, such as mudcrete, but they need to partner with other organisations, and so they've kind of put that out there as an option, which would be really good if we could pick it up. So I just think that's something as a council that we should be keeping an eye on as well, because it's aligned with our own council priorities in terms of the health of the Hauraki Gulf. So I guess the question is there a way in which we could be monitoring that as well?
Yeah, certainly. I think we can ask that. They were, as you note, they were granted that consent for the dredging just quite recently. But if they have indicated that they're willing to explore that, then it's certainly something we can ask them to report back on. And if the committee thought it was appropriate, we could even include it in the letter.
Thank you. Just to clarify, so this isn't to ask ports to stop dredging. They've got that consent, and it's not asking them to give up their consent about where they can do the marine dumping, because it is outside of the park. But in terms of moving towards that goal of stopping the marine dumping, it's about finding that alternative use for the marine dredging. So the marine dredged material, I think it's the right terminology. So that's what I would hope that we'd be looking to press the ports on in the future. So if there's any wording that could be incorporated, that would be great.
In terms of B, Councillor Coombe, we could add a 5, which is exploration of alternatives to dumping of dredged materials in the marine environment.
That would be awesome. If the seconder is happy to incorporate that.
Is the seconder happy with that change?
Yeah, I can't see it yet though.
No, because I've just handwritten it, and my handwriting hasn't been passed to our secretary. I've just done that. So it's really looking for alternative places to put dredged material to dumping in a marine environment, something along those lines.
Yeah. Thank you for that quick drafting. Very impressive.
The drafting was quicker than the quality of the writing, but Sandra is doing her very best with Suard here, so we'll see what we can do. Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. We now come to comments, and the first call is Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just following on from that notion of drafting and wording, I'd just really like to compliment the ports on some of the wording that they've used in their vision. In particular, the comment, we are committed to working with the community in an open and transparent manner as we develop to meet Auckland and the country's needs. And that's actually quite timely, because in amongst other things in the review that we've just covered, there was at least one of our CCOs, for instance, who was identified as having absolutely no reference to public interest in their constitution. So they somehow managed to go through all the pages of their constitution without making any reference, explicit or opaque, to commercial versus public interest considerations, whereas the ports here in this vision have made that very clear. Just one real point I want to make, and it goes to the comment in our report to do with point 25 under risks and mitigations. The comment is made that there is a broader risk that continued uncertainty about the port's future will at some point hamper its ability to operate. I say that, Mr. Mayor, because certainly in any conversations I've had with the management down at the ports, there is real and genuine concern over the damaging effects on staff and indeed on their business with the constant talk and undermining of the port, whether it be in terms of moving it or in terms of selling it. And I think as Auckland Council, we should be particularly mindful of that. There are real people, there are real livelihoods, and particularly at the moment, with all the other uncertainty, I don't think it's particularly productive on any scale for us not to be aware of those effects that we're having on, you know, the people who work down at the ports and the people that are managing the business on our behalf, and amongst other things, returning dividends to us as the main shareholder. So I hope that that's taken on board, Mr. Mayor, that risk that was spelt out there. And there does seem to be a bit of a propensity at times, and I think we've even had it here today, for councillors to run down some of these assets that we have. We saw it with the Civic Administration building, where it was, you know, is depicted as a asbestos-ridden, you know, pile of rubble, not looking quite so parlous now. We've seen it with our stadiums, where we undermine them, the stadiums that on the one hand can, you know, be praised lavishly by competitors and spectators alike, but if you listen to Auckland councillors, you get the impression that, you know, they're all about to fall over. So I think that very apt comment in respect of the port is a timely remember that they are assets that we have responsibility for. We shouldn't be undermining them. If we have criticisms, we should be doing that with a degree of sensitivity and confidence. And perhaps, you know, events of the last week or so are, you know, a very appropriate indication to that. But as far as the statement of intent goes, I'm pleased with the way the port's going. I'm finding the management far more receptive than has sometimes been the case in previous years. And for my part, I'm interested in bolstering and supporting our port, not least of which with the view of returning increased dividends to us in the years to come, and dividends that are sorely needed.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to say thank you, especially for the changes to the amendment rather, on health and safety. This is a very old and very broken record, this particular speech of mine. It's abhorrent to me that I read in the paper about serious injury, accidents and deaths at a port that's owned by the people of Auckland. And that's been the case until today, and I'm hoping that that will change. There's been a long history of very serious breaches at our port under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And these are real people. Lumboom Midnight Dyer went to work on the 27th of August 2018 and didn't come home. He was 23 years old. He was a straddle crane driver. It tipped on his side and killed him. 8 days ago, the Ports of Auckland pleaded guilty, admitted its failure to comply with a duty that exposes an individual to risk of death or serious injury. In 2017, Leslie Gelberger was having an ocean swim. He was hit by a pilot boat of the Ports of Auckland. Ports of Auckland admitted failure to comply with a duty that exposes an individual to risk of death or serious injury. They were fined $424,000. In 2015, Neil Bauer, a 50-year-old experienced stevedore, went to his work. He was seriously injured, falling off a boat when he was trying to release a container. Ports of Auckland were fined $50,000 and Neil was given $25,000 in reparation. He will probably never work again. These are real people. These are real consequences. And if that amendment allows me as an individual to find out if there were any systemic failures that went across all those incidents, then I will be very happy to find out. Do you know what? The best people to make a workplace safe or to know what makes a safe workplace are the workers and the unions, and I am so happy to see that amendment. And I would like those questions to be addressed, especially those failures on the part of Ports of Auckland to be addressed at our September meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And finally, Councillor Shane Henderson. Are you with us, Shane? Okay, I think we might have lost Councillor Henderson. We'll just pause for a moment. He was the last speaker. Okay, look, I think we'll need to move on. So we have moved and seconded an amended set of recommendations with the addition of B 1 to 4. I'm presuming that everybody's got a copy of that either on screen. Yep, everybody knows what they're voting on this. So I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, just 1 to 5.
Did I say 4?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, 1 to 5. So it's A plus recommendations B 1 to 5, Roman numerals. I'll put that those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. And just to double check that there was no voices in dissent on those recommendations. Right. Okay. Declare that carried. And we now move to item number 14, and that's the decision to opt in to the first stage of the National Three Waters Reform Programme in